10 months after the 3.1 Korean independence movement, Reverend Moon was born in Jeongju of Pyeongan-bokdo on January 6, 1920. Reverend Moon was a boy full of curiosity. He befriended nature, spending his days roaming the mountains and rivers. He was also quite mature, always thinking of others before himself. However, the nation was groaning in misery under the Japanese rule. His hometown, Jeongju, was on the path of refugees, running toward Manchuria. Reverend Moon's family was renowned for giving charity to those in need. His great-grandfather even left a saying, "If you feed people from all over the nation, the blessings of the nation will come to you." And thus, Reverend Moon's house became a place where the refugees tired from their journey could stop to eat food and rest. Having been raised with this kind of family tradition, from his early childhood, Reverend Moon couldn't ignore other people's pain and suffering. He often gave sacks of his family's rice to the refugees passing by his home. He understood that he needed new knowledge in order to reclaim the nation, and so he entered Osan School and transferred the following year to Jeongju Public School. Influenced by his grandfather, Yoon Moon, who was a pastor and also an independence activist, Reverend Moon's love for religion and his country grew.
At the age of 16, young Reverend Moon lost 5 of his 13 siblings. Grieving the death of his siblings and friends, and for the suffering of the nation, the young boy at 16 years of age went up a mountain alone to seek answers from God. On the dawn of Easter morning in 1935, the boy who prayed in tears all night long met Jesus in spirit. When I doubt people, I feel pain. When I judge people, it is unbearable. When I hate people, there is no value to my existence. But when I loved those who acted against me, I brought victory. If you have loved as I have, I will give you the crown of glory. His determination on this day to accomplish God's will became the force that drove him for his entire life. The young Reverend Moon became a completely different person after that Easter morning. He spoke less and spent more time in deep contemplation. When he turned 18 in 1938, he went to Huksukdong in Seoul. Homestay in an unfamiliar land, far away from his hometown for the first time. He entered Gyeongsang Commercial School with a major in electricity, which was the cutting-edge field of study, going to school on weekdays and to church on the weekends. He sought out the will of heaven and fundamental principles of the universe. His Bible worn to tatters from his study, and his tears from deep prayers soaked the floor. He cried because the pain and sorrow of God and Jesus touched his heart. In 1941, Reverend Moon went to Japan for further study. Thinking that learning about Japan thoroughly would help the liberation of his nation, he entered Waseda University and majored in electrical engineering. Apart from his studies, he voluntarily experienced the lowest kinds of life through working at a dockyard, and experienced the highest standards of life by sometimes sleeping at luxurious hotels. In such ways he trained himself vigorously. Under his motto, "One must govern himself before desiring the dominance of the universe," Reverend Moon worked to unite his mind and body. At the same time, he was very active in an underground independence organization created amongst Korean students. Reverend Moon constructed the main frame of Heaven's Word before the liberation. His preparation to soar through the sky was complete. However, because of his liberation activities, he was captured by the Japanese police. His bones were crushed, his flesh torn as he was tortured brutally. In 1945, the liberation finally came. The tragedy of losing what they once owned, having their children taken away to the Japanese army, the pain of oppression. The sorrow of Korean people during these 40 years was exactly what God had been going through. God's sorrowful heart. Reverend Moon became determined to liberate God from Satan's shackles and put him back on his rightful throne. This was the promise he made with heaven. Reverend Moon's public life began. He was 26 years old. He began searching for spiritual Christian sects and worked to spread the will of God and the new truth. The joy of Korea's liberation was cut short. The nation was divided into North and South at the 38th parallel line. In 1946, when refugees journeyed south seeking freedom, Reverend Moon went up north, remaining obedient to heaven's command. People who were thirsting for heaven's new words of truth came to Reverend Moon, and his number of followers expanded rapidly. In 1946 and 1948, because of local Christian churches' slanders and the North Korean Communist regime's religious persecution, Reverend Moon was arrested twice and dragged to Daedong Security Office, being charged as being a spy from South Korea. Reverend Moon endures more gruesome torture. Even through his suffering and anguish, Reverend Moon endures the torture by lamenting for God all the pain he had to go through. After 2.5 months of deadly torture, he was sent to a forced labor camp called Hungnam Fertilizer Factory, this time charged with disrupting the peace and order of society. It was back-breaking labor, starting at 4:30 in the morning to fill 1,300 bags of fertilizer in one day. The camp was a place of no return. Even in such a hellish environment, Reverend Moon shared his food with others and took care of his inmates, which gave him the title Prison Saint. On June 25, 1950, Reverend Moon was in the camp when the tragedy of the Korean people began. October 14th of the same year was the day he was to be executed. The North Korean army planned to retreat and began killing the inmates systematically. However, Hungnam's gates were opened due to the bombing of the United Nations forces. Reverend Moon left the camp with his new followers. It was 2 years, 8 months after being incarcerated. On December 4th, 1950, 40 days after he arrived in Pyongyang, he decided to head south. His body was battered after the long imprisonment and forced labor. But he made it out of North Korea even while carrying one of his followers on his back. After 2 months of traveling, Reverend Moon settled in Bumnekgol, Busan. On May 11th of the same year, Reverend Moon began writing The Divine Principle. The Divine Principle reveals the most fundamental principles of God, humanity, and the universe. It explains the entire providential process beginning from God's creation of humanity, their fall, and God's providence to restore them. On May 10th, 1952, when Reverend Moon was 33, the original Divine Principle was completed. It took 1 year to complete. On that day, a female missionary from a local church came to visit Reverend Moon in his mud hut. She came intending to convert Reverend Moon, but was converted by him instead. Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity was founded in Pukakdong, Songdong-gu, Seoul. Reverend Moon had sought out Christian churches, but they only persecuted him for their misunderstanding. Because of their disbelief of the prepared foundation, he had to start anew, putting new wine in new wineskins. He had to make a new beginning to pioneer a new heaven, new earth, and new age. Reverend Moon's words spread like wildfire in the universities. Especially two mission schools, Yonsei and Iwa Women's University, were at the center of this whirlwind. Why couldn't the omnipotent God prevent the fall of man and all the misery throughout history? Was Jesus destined to be crucified? When, where, and how will the Lord come? The headquarters church at Cheongpadong, which was then called Seoul Church, was crowded with people who came with these kinds of questions. Reverend Moon would speak with such fervor that his clothes would be drenched with sweat and cried tears of blood as he prayed, and so the congregation would break out in wailing. The Seoul Church was nicknamed the Wailing Church, as its influence expanded, the persecution by the Christian church became greater, and even the media started accusing the Unification Church of being a cult.
July 4th, 1955. Reverend Moon was incarcerated on the charges of evading the military draft and destroying families. Overflowing with love for humanity, he did not blame or hate anyone. He was released as innocent 3 months later. However, the rumors made up at this time are still being used by Christians as though they were facts. God's providence was harmed, and Reverend Moon took the most critical damage, but he did not make any excuses. Truth prevails in the end. As to stand as a proof to this statement, the Church continued to expand greatly.
Enlightened theologians recognized the value of the divine principle at first sight. Christian Academy House Debate. In 1960, Reverend Moon was 40 years old. His holy marriage was held in Cheongpadong, Seoul. The groom of heaven who found the principle through tears, shedding blood, in order to indemnify the providence of restoration all alone, and now standing victorious. The bride of the earth more pure and beautiful than white lilies, answering the call of heaven. The dream that was never realized since the fall. The joyous day of the relief of heaven's sorrowful heart, the realization of humanity's greatest dream. From this day, Reverend and Mrs. Moon began to walk the path of the true parents, true teachers, and true owners. 7 years after the holy marriage, the two created the model of true peace and heaven on earth. This period was a model course to create the ideal true family that serves God and humanity through the heavenly lineage severed from fallen nature. Reverend and Mrs. Moon set the standard of the true family and then strived to go beyond race, nation, and reach the world. Reverend and Mrs. Moon extended this 7-year model of the public course from the individual level to family, tribe, race, nation, world, all the way to the cosmic level, restoring God's lineage and His original status. With a per capita income of $100. Reverend Moon started an enlightenment program in rural areas together with witnessing efforts of his followers. Japan was the first world stage pioneered to spread the words of heaven. Reverend Moon visited Japan 6 years after 1959 when it was first pioneered. He prayed for Japan and led the young people to the path of heaven. The Japanese members risked their lives to spread the principle to university students affiliated with North Korea. Today, Japanese members are the greatest in number in the Unification Church and play an important role in worldwide witnessing. All this would have been impossible if Reverend Moon had not poured so much love into the nation that brought him near to death during the colonization. From the 70s, witnessing in America started upon the foundation created in Korea and Japan. In the early 70s, America was moaning in serious sickness. Young people wandered around without any vision, intoxicated and soiled with drugs and free sex. In the winter, of 1971, Reverend Moon left for America. The eccentric pastor from the East began spreading the message of heaven while touring around the nation. After a while, Reverend Moon became an icon for the spiritual revolution of the American society.
May I present the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. 최근 미국이 국제식량한 땅에 떨어지고 너역은 죄악의 도상이요 악마의 것으로 화해가고 있습니다. 대국 전역에 이와 같이 사탄이 도인이 될 때 하나님은 외면하실 수밖에 없고 급기야 미국을 떠나실 수밖에 없게 될 것입니다. 지금이 바로 그런 때인 것을 똑똑히 알아야 합니다.
Leaders were the first to listen. Rekindling the founding spirit of America, Reverend Moon attracted more attention after he was invited to speak at the House of Representatives. 300,000 people gathered at the Washington Monument Assembly.
무엇보다도 무신론에 입각한 공산주의의 위협은 가장 심각하며 이 시간에도 도처에서 침식에 들어오고 있습니다. 이것은 단지 미국만의 문제가 아니고 하나님께 있어 그리고 모든 종교인과 온 자유세계인들에게 있어 심각하고도 절박한 문제입니다. 하나님께서 200년간 준비하신 미국은 크게 각성하고 하나님께서 분부하신 중차대한 세계적 사명을 다하여야 할 것입니다.
Various young people of transcending religious sects gathered. Americans were now excited about the teachings of Reverend Moon. However, pain and suffering found true parents again in America. Worried about the fast-growing influence of the church, racists and communist sympathizers joined in force to persecute Reverend Moon. They came up with the tax issue. Funds for witnessing work were not taxed in America, which was a Christian nation. However, America had closed its heart. Consequently, Reverend Moon was imprisoned in Danbury. After the Japanese rule, North Korea's communist regime, and South Korea's Christian regime, innocent Reverend Moon was imprisoned for the 6th time.
교회와 기독교와 이 나머지 세계가 하나 될 줄 믿고 감옥에서 하나 못 되는 이 무리들을 하나 만들려가는 내 테리토리는 우리의 영토인데 영토에 사는 사람을 새로이 하나 만들 이 운동을 위해 간다는 것을 알려.
Mrs. Moon's grief was greater than anyone's.
(1984년 7월 20일은) 정말로 빼서 없애버리고 싶은 날이기도 했습니다. 감옥까지 해방하러 가신다고 당신을 위해서 울지 말고 뜻이 성사되는 걸 위해서 기도하라는 말씀을 누누이 하셨지만 왠지 그런 말을 듣게 될 때 나도 어떻게 억제할 수 없는 소름이 복받쳤습니다.
Reverend Moon's imprisonment served as the catalyst of a massive movement for religious freedom. The tribulation of Danbury united the American society, especially the Christians, who were divided into many different sects. President Barack Obama's mentor, Reverend Joseph Lowry, stood in the forefront of the religious community demanding religious freedom.
What I do understand is that I'm not secure until his rights are secure. And Farwell is not secure until Lowry is secure. None of us is secure until all of us are secure.
Reverend Moon washed dishes and cleaned his place in the day and read at night. At 3 in the morning, he woke up to pray for forgiveness for the situation and prayed for the end of the Cold War and for world peace. One month before his release, he directed prominent scholars to proclaim the end of communism in Switzerland. In order to end the Cold War, he used the Washington Times to play a critical role in establishing the Star Wars policy, and created the public opinion which helped prevent the spread of communism in Central and South America.
Together we rolled up our sleeves.
For his efforts to end the Cold War and fight for religious freedom. In this period, Reverend and Mrs. Moon received 4 honorary doctorates. Reverend Moon was finally released after 1 year and 3 months of incarceration. The wrongful imprisonment helped the Unification Church to create a more solid foundation, hastened the end of the Cold War, and promoted religious alliance. These miracles happened during his time in Danbury. Of the Unification Church went beyond America and reached every corner of the globe. Now, Reverend Moon's thoughts and words are spread across 195 nations in all continents. The Church overcame the tribulations of martyrs in communist nations, being imprisoned by other religions. The foundation for the victory was none other than Reverend Moon's ceaseless sincerity and support.
In 1990, the biggest event in the 20th century happened. It was the fall of communism. On April 11, 1991, Reverend Moon met with Soviet Union President Gorbachev.
I must have forgotten about it during the times of perestroika.
The meeting was held in a lively and friendly mood. Reverend Moon supported Gorbachev, who was working to bring revolution and reformation at the time. The two leaders earnestly discussed about economic cooperation between Korea and the Soviet Union, and also about the peaceful unification of the Korean peninsula. This hastened the end of the Cold War. Later, Gorbachev visited Reverend and Mrs. Moon in Korea. The smiles on the leaders who put an end to the tragedy of the 20th century were bright. December 6, 1991. He talked about the peace of Korea with the very person who sought to kill him. Now, Reverend Moon gives financial support to charity and hosts cultural sports exchange more than any other religious organizations or business companies in South Korea. Reverend Moon's true love embraced even his enemy who tried to take his life. Just like the story of Jacob embracing his brother Esau with love in order to indemnify the sins of Cain and Abel, Reverend Moon used this same philosophy in interacting with North Korea.
After the liberation, the Korean peninsula was dominated by the ideological battle of left and right. Untouched by the warm breeze of détente, the relationship of North and South Korea is still ice cold. In 1968, Reverend Moon created the International Federation for Victory over Communism. The International Federation's goal was to research, criticize, and overcome communist theory and system, and realize the true ideal of mutual living, prosperity, and righteousness. In 1975, as communism expanded rapidly after the defeat of Vietnam War, blue-eyed foreigners shouting in the streets to save the nation could be seen all over the country. These foreigners were the members of the Unification Church who came from all over the world to participate in the movement. This movement against communism reached its peak in 1975, when 1 million people gathered at the Save the Nation rally held in Yeouido.
하나님이 있다 하는 세계는 하나님 편이요, 하나님이 없다 하고 하는 세계는 사탄과 악마의 세계입니다. 이 두 세계가 부딪힐 때 그 결과는 하나님의 전망을 결정하는 것입니다. 그러므로 공산주의를 쓰러뜨리는 이 싸움은 곧 하나님의 싸움이 되는 것입니다.
Washington, D.C., America's heart of politics. Reverend Moon founded the Washington Times in 1982 to correct the public opinion that had been heavily influenced by the left wing. The newspaper gave great influence and strength to the White House all the way till the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 90s.
From the start, the Washington Times was not shy about challenging the more established media outlets. Freedom prevailed in the Cold War, without a shot being fired, I might add.
In difficult times, even more than in easy ones, the voice of conservatism must make itself heard in the media.
The Cold War. Can we go beyond the walls of national boundaries, race, culture, and religion, and create a world of perpetual peace and happiness? The question all religions seek for an answer. Reverend Moon proposes International Blessing Marriage Ceremony as the answer. Reverend Moon teaches that through the blessing, humanity can be rid of original sin, be connected to the heavenly divine lineage, and after removing fallen nature through the path of indemnity, we will find the kingdom of God and His righteousness. The blessing marriage ceremony, which started in 1960 with 3 couples, increased into hundreds of millions of couples in just 40 years. Finally, on January 27, 2001, the World Peace Blessing Ceremony was held at the New York UN headquarters. Blacks with whites, wealthy and poor, Japanese and Koreans, Jews and Christians giving their vows. The intercultural, inter-exchange, international blessing marriage ceremony is no longer a unification church ritual. This is receiving attention as the fundamental solution to realize the ideal of one world family under one God. Dubbed as the world government, though stating to arbitrate the interests of 195 member nations, unceasing sharp conflict between these nations remains so that the UN can hardly work to fulfill its original function. Reverend Moon aims to revolutionize the social system through NGOs and the UN, centering on the blessings of families. The UN's gate was first opened through Mrs. Moon. She proclaimed the dawning of the Age of Women in 1992 and founded the Women's Federation for World Peace and began to renew the UN. In 2000, Reverend and Mrs. Moon spoke together, calling for the renewal of the UN. In 2011, at the UN headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, Mrs. Moon conveyed the message of peace to every nation in the world. Reverend Moon's main goal for the renewal of the UN is to implement the system of Senate and representatives. In order to hasten the renewal of the UN, Reverend Moon founded the Universal Peace Federation. Transcending the profit of one's own nation, in order to create a solution for world peace, Reverend Moon mobilized his entire foundation for world peace. The original UN is called the Kane UN, and this new organization is called the Able UN. Current and former national leaders from all over the world who support Reverend Moon's peace initiative are participating in large numbers under the title of Peace Ambassador. President Jonathan Goodluck, who became President of Nigeria in July 2000, has been actively participating in Reverend Moon's World Peace Movement as a peace ambassador. After the inauguration, the President Goodluck invited Reverend and Mrs. Moon and hosted a Universal Peace Federation rally. It was to find a solution for the country's racial conflict and for the revival of Africa.
And Earth Training Center, where you can experience training and meditation centering on unification principle. Reverend Moon is working hard to lead not just Christians, but representatives from all major religions to overcome their differences and work together for The foundation for the equalization of technology is being laid in both industrial and economic fields to create a mutually prosperous world. All fields from medicine, beverages, machinery, construction, shipbuilding, and even leisure tourism. Reverend Moon gives special attention and much investment into the ocean industry and aviation industry in order to solve world hunger and to prepare for the space age. Media outlets in Korea, Japan, and America are providing fast and accurate information and leading the formation of a righteous public opinion. Raising global leaders with international minds who show love for heaven, human, and the nation. Schools from preschool to graduate schools are in operation in Korea and America. Here, the gate to the world of learning and truth is open. Culture, art, and sports which transcend all barriers. The Little Angels and Universal Ballet make the world beautiful through Korea's traditional dances, songs, and heavenly art. It's combining East and West. Songnam Ilhwa, the top soccer team in Asia, and the world-level international soccer tournament, the Peace Cup. Reverend Moon is creating the world centering on the culture of heart, which transcends all national boundaries.
Reverend Moon also greatly influenced Korea's automobile and electronics industry. In 1980, he brought automobile parts manufacturing technologies from Germany to Korea. And in 1988, he bought Japan's Wacom Electronics and led the development of Korea's electronics industry. Mid-90s, Reverend Moon expanded to South America. In 1997, at age 77, Reverend Moon explored the rainforest of the Amazon and pioneered the path humanity will tread in the new millennium. Pantanal, Brazil still contains the wonders of ancient nature. Here, Reverend Moon is educating the community culture of a peaceful world and is preparing the foundation for the leisure industry of the future. There's another place where Reverend Moon has been paying much attention from the year 2008. That place is known as today's Sodom and Gomorrah, the Sin City, Las Vegas. Reverend Moon has been investing his time and money to turn Las Vegas from Sin City to Sun City. This is because he knows God's heart, which yearns to save every last soul in the deepest depth of hell. He is attracting the attention of the world with the Bering Strait project, under operation along with the Korea-Japan undersea tunnel, which are both being worked on. The nations concerned are discreetly discussing the matter. The project, which is called the World Peace King Bridge and Tunnel, will connect Russia and America, and it symbolizes the effort to destroy the barriers made by Satan. Tongil Group exists to support this ideal. Reverend Moon's countless international activities of various different fields have one main purpose. This is to tear down all barriers and realize God's ideal of creating one family under God. Took place at the U.S. Capitol building. Along with major religious leaders, UN ambassadors from many nations, and U.S. congressmen, and many world leaders of different fields crowned Reverend and Mrs. Moon as the Peace King. Reverend Moon's life and works, despite all the persecution, moves the hearts of the righteous. The crown of glory was offered to God. Under the title of Peace King, Reverend Moon held coronation ceremonies in Korea and America in January 2009. This was the day the pain of 6,000 years due to the relieved, and the day the sovereignty stolen by Satan was reclaimed back to God's side. The promise he made with heaven at 16 was finally fulfilled at age 90.